Hello, friends. So it's Amy, the art of imperfect adulting. Amy says so, unmuted. I've set aside this hour to work on my latest project. I'm going to tell you about that today. What I'm going to use this hour for today, this is this new idea I have. And what I'm going to use this hour for today is to talk about data. And that'll make maybe a little bit more sense at the end, or maybe not. And I'm going to post it, and it's going to be one of a series of sort of end of year things that I'm putting together, which are not interviews and are sort of back office sort of musings. What I want to say about that is that I will present these things as my ideas and thoughts, but I hope it will be the start of a conversation, right? As a solo creator and indie creator, I create my things in like a vacuum. And the only way for me to get them out to you is to actually put them out there. So it's going to often sound like these are conclusions and statements, and maybe they are, but this is the start of a conversation. So if you don't agree, let me know. That's that. I used to work with this guy. His name was Larry Williams. He was a commodity trader who did workshops training other aspiring commodity traders, speculators, to do what he did. His name was Larry Williams. I'm not sure if he's still alive. He was older than I am. You've probably never heard of him. Fun little tidbit. You've almost definitely heard of his daughter. Her name is Michelle. She's a very famous actress. I never got to meet her. Here's the boring backstory of how this came to be. I was in my 20s. I was working for a software company. They made a tool that Larry used. The company sponsored his seminars, his workshops, and it was part of my job to hop around the country going to his seminars. I sat in the back of the room and I offered to sell the software to the people who attended his workshops. There was a line or a part in his presentation that came up a lot that I feel like I heard 10 million times. That's a slight exaggeration. He would say something like, if you beat the data, if you beat the numbers up long enough, they will show you whatever you want to see. It might have been they will tell you what you want to hear. I'm paraphrasing, and it's been decades since this happened. So it's his line, not mine. But the thing that I do remember is that he mentioned that because he was teaching a style that people would try and make into like absolute rules, and they would ask him for ways to apply it and just act on it without checking it. And it was his opinion that, there was some humanness to it. Like, here's the tool, here's the technique, but you should check it with your very human brain. And there were people who also in this industry would sell systems that we call black box systems, which were automated trading tools where they would actually execute the trades based on a set of rules and no human intervention. Stuff like that still exists, right? So black box systems. So that is what that is. We still do this today. There are black box systems that we are all a part of in the creator space, not trader space, because I'm no longer in that industry. But things like the YouTube algorithm, the Netflix suggestion algorithm, the TikTok algorithm, the Uber surge pricing tools. We know these exist. They impact us, but somebody somewhere knows the rules that they are using for that, but not us. We just are impacted by them. And so that's an example of something that could be called a black box system, right? We don't know the rules of why Uber changes their rates. I flew back into Miami a couple days ago, and the price for me to get from the airport to my house, which is like super close, was almost $100 because of surge pricing. It was like super insane. I took a taxi. I didn't pay Uber for that. Here's the thing. Data often feels like it's neutral. The other word we use for this is objective, right? And it's just numbers, right? Without feelings or thoughts or emotion. And I think that's probably true when we're talking about elementary school math class. 3 + 4 = 7. Side story, just because I get easily distracted. When I was a kid, this is a true story. I had to bring home a math test and have my dad sign it. I think this probably means that I didn't do well on the test, although maybe it was all the tests that had to be signed. I don't know. Anyway, my father looked at it and he was confused because there was a question that I had gotten wrong, but it had not been marked as totally incorrect. I got partial credit. I don't know if they still do that. And my father was so concerned about this that he actually set up a meeting with the teacher. And what I remember about this, I very clearly remember him talking to the teacher and being like, hey, she got the wrong answer. Why didn't you mark it it wrong. And the teacher was like, but she showed her work. He was like, yeah, but she's got the wrong answer. Like, she needs to know how to get the correct answer. Anyway, side story about math being objective, right? In my opinion, and in maybe some other people's opinions as well, it's not always true that data is objective or neutral. In fact, some people think that data can be used as a tool of injustice or even oppression. And the reason that that can happen is that, and this is, what I think, but you don't have to agree, but we don't count everything. We don't count everybody. And at some point, there are people or groups who are in the position to decide what information we count and what we analyze. And so that means that it's partisan, right? I first ran into this sort of phenomenon because I'm not a statistician or a politician or somebody who does this, but I do some coaching with step parents. I am a step parent. And I ran into a historian whose name is Stephanie Kuntz. She wrote a couple of great books. One is about nostalgia, the way we never were, and the history of marriage. One of the things she teaches is about how to be curious and not rely on some of the data because the sourcing of some of the data we use, specifically in the United States, about family is maybe not totally reliable, right? And the source matters a lot. There's a difference between counting up marriage licenses and surveying people and asking them about how they represent themselves in your family, right? Specific to divorce and step parents, we don't file for a certificate or a license when we get divorced. And people who are listening are like, wait a minute, I had to file in court to get my divorce. Yes, yes, absolutely true. And it's not as easy to count those up, apparently. It's not a thing I do, but apparently it's not as easy to count those up as it is to count up marriage licenses, which are required in, I think, all the states. And with step parents, at one point, apparently we did ask on the census for this, but we don't anymore. And so there is no accurate list. There's no certificate to be a step parent. There's no license. There's no nothing. You just wake up one day and you're like, ta-da, here I am, right? And all that means is that the data is not absolute and it might not be right. Sometimes it's right. I'm not saying it's all wrong. So this is a topic when we talk about data and how we compartmentalize it and how we source it and who gets to make the decisions that can quickly become political, feminist, anti-racist, any of those things. I'm actually not the person to lead that discussion. There are people who are much better than me to teach on that topic. And so I just want to say that, like, that's not my intention here. Why am I talking about this at all? Why am I talking about it now? I'm talking about it because in a lot of ways, I'm doing my end of year sort of wrap up. Like, what have I created this year? What has worked? What hasn't? What do I want to do next year? And a lot of other people are doing the same thing. This week, both Spotify and YouTube released their annual wrap ups for creators and podcasters. This is new for YouTube, which is fun. Spotify has done this for a while. Is YouTube going after Spotify? Magic 8 Ball might say yes. Seems likely. These are top lists, top 10 podcasters in the United States, top 10 shows on YouTube. I look at them because I'm interested in seeing what goes on, even though I have very, very little in common with the top 10 of any list in this space. The top 10 creators on YouTube and Spotify and Apple, these are now today very much corporate creations, right? And, Mel Robbins, Jay Shetty, Joe Rogan, those are corporate shows. These are not indie creators, right? Even Mr. Beast, who is at the top of the list for YouTube, who is one of the OG indie creators, is now corporate, right? He's got a company. He's indie in his heart. He's indie in his heart. He's really indie in his heart. But he's now got a team and he knows what to do and he's a force to be reckoned with. And that makes him, in my opinion, corporate. Notably, all of these lists are dominated by men. This is look for yourself, okay? In my opinion, in my experience, media and entertainment is still today a sector that is heavily male dominated. You can call that my opinion if you want. If you have a contrary argument about, women being in charge of these organizations, have at it. I'd love to hear it. At the same time, Headlines circulated last week, I think last week, maybe the week before, that on the social media platform LinkedIn, when a group of individuals shifted their identity to show up as a male instead of a female, they experienced a huge bump in visibility. I'm not a LinkedIn expert. I post on LinkedIn and I move on. That's my entire experience with LinkedIn. These are anecdotal reports of experiences. A fancier word for that is hermeneutic. I probably mispronounced that. Fancy word, super fun. This report, this anecdotal report, these stories, these raise the question of whether or not it was possible that this platform might be favoring male profiles and exposure. The company has refuted this and denied it. And I don't even know either way. Like, I don't have an opinion of whether or not it's right or not. I will say, like, that you may not have heard about this, you may not have seen it. I do believe that while I read it, I think that most women sort of reacted with a collective, very tired, and worn down sigh that goes a little like this. This again. All right. Why am I talking about this at all? Great question. Well, I am a woman creator. I'm on these platforms. I myself would really like to collect and collaborate with other female indie creators, a big group of indie creators. But I have been unsuccessful in finding a directory or a list that includes women podcasters, women bloggers, women writers, women YouTubers, women who make films, women who make videos, women who make photographs, creators, women who are creating. And this is where I'm going to talk about the data, because what I'm going to talk about is what I'm going to call an epistemic omission. Fancy words, such fancy words. This means the lack of knowledge due to an absence of information. It's an omission, right? We don't know how many women are out there creating podcasts or creating YouTube videos because those platforms don't ask if you're a woman when you sign up. And this omission of asking is actually presented as a way of allowing for equitability. And you know what? These are open platforms. We don't ask. And one of the reasons we don't ask is to prevent oppression upon entry. And that's accurate, totally accurate. Both of these things I think can be true. There's nothing stopping women from creating on these platforms. Agreed, stipulated. And that's the reason, one of the reasons we do that. And I think that's important, right? So wait a minute, right? If you're sitting there watching or listening to this and you're thinking, Amy, there are groups for women podcasters. Okay, yeah, okay, sure. But also not really, right? There are some. I'm in some. Right? If you Google and you say group of women podcasters, you're going to find She Podcast. You're going to find women in podcasting. The Facebook group for She Podcast was super active for years back in 2016. The people who founded it, Elsie and Jess, they great people. But in reality, it's an inactive group. And all it ever was a Facebook group with very strict rules and heavily influenced by their own corporate sponsors and what they did, which is nothing wrong with that, right? I'll talk about that in a second. There's another group, Women in Podcasting. It's run by a woman out of Canada. You can pay to become a member of that group. I did that, and I will just throw that group and its founder under the bus because I paid her for a membership, and the only thing I've ever heard from her is ads for her AI course. They also have an award program that is anyway. I have very strong opinions about it. They're mine and mine alone, based on my experience. Am I bitter about it? Maybe. I don't know. Mostly, I'm feeling just frustrated that I haven't been able to find what I've been looking for. The groups that exist today, in my opinion, based on what I found, are heavily slanted towards being led by single creators or coaches. That's things like it's people like Jenna Kutcher and Kathy Heller, right? And that's great. It's fine. It is what it is. There's nothing wrong with that. Or they're oriented to very specific niches and ideologies, like Latinas in podcasting and Feminist Podcast Collective. Again, great groups, nothing wrong with that. In fact, I can take the position that those groups are super helpful and necessary, and I support them, right? But what I have been looking for is a larger group of women who are creating on a variety of channels, right? If you're watching this, you will be able to easily tell that I do not have melanated skin. I'm not brown skin. There's nothing, that's just not who I am. Vivo en Miami, pero no soy Latina. And the use of data to impact groups, right, of Latin people who speak Spanish by language, by skin color, by race, by gender, any of those things. The use of data to impact groups is accurate for all. groups that could be considered marginalized groups. Like this is something that people study with regards to fields like healthcare and finance and legal systems and housing and voting, many other things. Not me. It's not what I do. This is done by much other people who are researchers and analysts, more political people, academics. I just listened to a presentation from a woman who is studying the role of women in sports as her dissertation. Good work. Good work. Not work I do, but good work that other people do. Today, I'm talking about something that impacts me, something that I want, right? And this is the concept of creating the room you want to be in when you don't find it, creating the table you want to invite people to because you don't have it, and that kind of thing. I am a female creator. I create a streaming video show, an audio podcast, a newsletter, a website with content. I'm a photographer. Historically, I now do that all mostly as a hobby. A group or for women who come together and create stuff who would like to support each other, collaborate, peer-to-peer connection. I've had hundreds of conversations with people over the last 18 months, right? This is not an exaggeration. 178 of them are recorded and preserved and released on The Art of Imperfect Adulting. I've also had, I can go back and look it up, but I also do a bunch of just connections with women through the groups I'm in and have those conversations. One of the things, if you had a conversation with me in the past year or 5 years, one of the things that I do when I talk to people is ask them about what groups they're in. Where do you hang out? Can I hang out there too? Do you want to be my friend? That's how that conversation goes. And that question was deeply rooted in my idea that I just really wanted and thought that eventually, if I asked enough people, I would get referred to a group that already existed for what I was looking for. That's how I found Paulette and Latinas in podcasting. That's how I found Becky Mollenkamp and Feminist Podcasters Collective. That's how I found Hannah in She Rises, which is a group for women that is pretty faith-based, in my opinion, which is, again, nothing wrong with it. I haven't found a trade association or broad group of women creators in a peer-to-peer group, right? If you think that exists and you want to invite me to the group, let me know. Please tell me because I am throwing my hat into the ring and I would be happy to join instead of trying to build it myself. Last week, I actually reached out to the team. Last week on an evergreen thing is not very helpful. I'm recording this in December of 2025. I reached out to the support team of the team that runs a database of podcast information. They also have a newsletter database, and this is called Braphonic. It's a very modern sort of creation. I think that they scrape the information about podcasts and the content from the available public information by podcast platforms. It definitely is probably one of those things that borderlines on the is this ethical? Is this not? Da 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 da. Not a question that I can answer. I happen to very much like this product, and also there's another one called Listen Notes, and I just sent them an email and I said, hey, listen, I've got this thing. I'd love to be able to reach out to people who are female hosts and women producers and stuff like that. Is there a way to sort through this list to get that? And within 24 hours, they wrote me back and they very politely replied. And I'm going to read you the reply. Hi, Amy. Really appreciate you reaching out. I totally get why you'd want that data. I'd love to say that we can help, but there's unfortunately no reliable way for us to determine creator gender from the publicly available info we pull in. I wish we had a better answer, but it's just not something the data can support right now, right? So there's no data. And the reason I'm harping on this is that all the time you'll find people who are representing the data. And it's a very important question, I think, to ask, how did you get that data? Because the data and how it's collected matters a lot, right? There are survey-based things where they report on creators. So like grad students did a report based on looking for information about marginalized groups in podcasting. It's a survey, right? And it's pulled from the top 100 podcasts. So knowing where it comes from impacts the data we get. But there's a guy named Jeremy Yenz. He does a podcasting report. He solicits surveys from the people who are in his universe. It's not that it's inaccurate what he's reporting. It's just where it comes from matters a lot. Listen, I had to take a class in college about how to write surveys and figure out the margin and errors. It was considered a math class. And so this is one of the things that at one point somebody taught me about. Maybe I think more about it than I ever should. Anyway, My point is that there's really no data, right? And in my opinion, my experience, the industry is heavily slanted towards men. I think I know that because I have eyeballs and ears, and it's super obvious to me. This is not actually a problem that I can fix with a snap of my fingers, or I have no magic wand. Even if it was, I'm not in a role to do that. I'm not a politician. I'm not even actually an activist, and I'm definitely not an industry insider. I'm an indie creator. But I do really want to be in a group of women creators, people who show up in the world as women, women who are creating podcasts, making YouTube videos, writing newsletters, online magazines, printed magazines, which are going through a resurgence, right? Taking photographs, making films and videos and shows. And I happen to think that we are in an era where people aren't limited or restricted to one creative channel or media. Medium, media is plural, medium is the singular, right? Um, but instead, I think that most of us today are what I call omni-channel creators. I don't think I made up that word, but maybe I did. Anyway, I want this enough that I'm actually willing to decide to assemble it myself, to try to assemble it myself. Right now, I'm calling this unmuted. Unmuted, I don't think is a real word, at least not yet. Maybe it is. This is just inspired by that phenomenon in Zoom rooms where one person is yapping away, yappity, 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 yap, and while muted, and the rest of the room is like, we can't hear you. You are muted. Please unmute yourself. That's where I got this name, unmuted. Um, and maybe it'll change because this right now is an idea. It's just an idea that I'm putting out to see if there's interest in it. If you'd like to join me, if you'd like to find out more about it, this is your invitation. Reach out. Let's talk. Thanks. And I'll put a link somewhere, wherever this goes in the description or whatever. I'll put a link for the existing information behind this concept and how you can connect with me. Thank you so much. Ciao, ciao.